Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. The potential of smarter factories driven by advanced technologies and greater connectivity is exciting, but equally daunting. That's because in our enthusiasm to embrace all the time and cost savings associated with the machines, automation, and data associated with these advancements, the industrial sector often pushes one of the most important aspects of all this connectivity into the realm of tomorrow's problems. Well, tomorrow is here. There are over 20 billion connected devices in the industrial sector, and that number is projected to nearly double in the next 5 years. Additionally, according to Rapid, the largest API hub in the world, over 60% of API users are in manufacturing. So some simple math shows that we'll continue to see a surge in both the number of connections and the need to be secured, and more specifically, an increasing number of application programming interface connections that also need to be defended. So just to refresh, these are the calls that are made between devices, software, and other connected assets to trigger an action or to share information. And if you're not interested in them, well, trust me, the hackers are. Before we get to our guest, I'm excited to announce that Security Breach is now being sponsored by Rockwell Automation. For more information on their cybersecurity solutions, you can go to rockwellautomation.com. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Jason Kent, hacker in residence at Cequence Security, a leader in API protection solutions. Jason, thanks so much for joining us today. I think you have one of the more interesting titles of anybody we've had on Security Breach, so maybe we could just start off by talking a little bit about what does it mean to be a hacker in residence, and what are some of the things you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so, I work for a company called Cequence Security, and we are a security company, but security companies help other people usually. And so having someone in residence, in-house, that literally is doing adversarial work against these clients is really my job. So I take a look at why they're being attacked, how they're being attacked, how they could be attacked, how I could attack them. And we put things together and we try to figure out what are the best mitigation routes, how can we stop the traffic that's bad that's coming in, and then what should we be doing analysis on. A lot of what we do has machine learning that runs underneath of it, but as you probably know or maybe know, machine learning is not at a state where you just point it at stuff and it goes. Machine learning is at a state where you say, I need to compare, do Bayesian analytics on these maybe 5 data points, and then the machine learning kicks in. So there's a lot of that. I sit down and look at login flows. I look at how traffic goes across APIs, and I try to figure out, like, how are we going to build a mitigation strategy? Where are the attacks going to come from, and that kind of stuff. And then I do original research. So I do a lot of responsible disclosure type work.
Interesting. I know Cequence is really focused on the API security, but in addition to that, are there some other vulnerabilities that you continue to come across in your role?
Yeah, we continue to see all manner of things, right? And then new things come online all the time. So we're still seeing Log4j, which is an Apache vuln that had a patch come out for it. What, 2 years ago now? Right. Right. Yeah. We still see that, right? So there's those kinds of vulnerabilities out there, but a lot of what happens in an API work that most organizations do is business logic flaws. It's literally, I forgot to protect this endpoint, or some workflow that's there. A good example of this is there's an ISP in Australia that had an endpoint open on their APIs that was for a third party. If you throw a phone number at it, it would give you back the subscriber data, right? So if I gave it your phone number, it would give me back your name and address and all the stuff about you that the system had. It was a mistake. They didn't mean to do that. But that's an example of a business logic flaw. The thing's open to the public internet and I can touch it.
Jeez. I mean, that's a great example, too, in terms of how I think a lot of folks, especially in the industrial sector, are looking past this. They think a lot of these low-hanging fruit has already been picked and taken care of, but obviously it's still a huge concern. In your role, I think that's one example. There's got to be some other stuff that maybe you've come across too that you're just surprised to see that this was actually a vulnerability. Maybe you could share some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen organizations that, if you look at somebody's APIs, you'll see it'll say example.com/v1/API/whatever, right? And then the call goes out. That V1, that tells me they're versioning their APIs. And I've seen a V16 and a V1 existing at the same time. V16 was a SAML authenticated, multi-factor, like, all the security pieces that they could shove in there. And V1 had bad forgot password routine on it, and you could just recover accounts. And so when you look at, what happens in development and through the life cycle of these systems, you start to see that, you first bring it online, you want that basic functionality. And then as you advance, you have to remember that that basic functionality is still there, and you have to tie the two things together a little better.
Why do you think these vulnerabilities, which some of them are kind of basic in terms of things that should have been covered, why do you think they persist? Is it not a priority? Is it just being overlooked in the rush of other things, or what's your experience there?
Well, web security in general is a really underserved thing, I think. I've been doing application security for about 25 years now. You can tell I have a little gray in my beard from it. And it's one of those things where, when I first started doing this, I'm pretty sure I knew everyone. And here I am 25 years later, and I know a lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's just because there isn't a lot of AppSec talent that comes out, right? Developers don't learn this in college. There's no application security college courses like there are developer courses, right?
Okay.
And so developers learn how to create the things, and then they get a little aside the last day of their school that says, oh, by the way, security something or another. And there's not a lot of focus on it. So what we try to do as a community is we try to get developers interested in security and build champions in those organizations so that they can understand what it is that a security flaw would look like. It's a lot of just putting on your thinking cap and saying, what can I do to mess this up? How can I break this thing? Yeah. And once you figure that out, then you can figure out how to fix it. And that's the reason why there's such disparity in, these seem like simple flaws versus how much application gets developed. And it's because there just isn't a lot of developers out there that are writing secure code. They're just writing code.
Interesting. I mean, we so much talk about STEM and trying to get folks into engineering and everything else. Cybersecurity is definitely on the cusp as well, and needing more bodies and more good people doing that kind of work.
Absolutely. But we had to fly. The Wright brothers had to get their plane off that sand dune at Kitty Hawk for us to go to the moon, right? So it's just a journey.
Great point. I'm kind of wondering, you talked about you knew everybody when you started, and there's going to be more and more people involved. It always kind of brings me back a little bit to the issue of transparency when it comes to a lot of these attacks and sharing information within the industry. How do you think we're doing? Are we being transparent enough? Are we sharing enough stuff? Should there be more mandates out there to force people potentially into doing so?
So I think the ISACs have done a really great job of bringing people together, right? The FSISAC, RHISAC, there's an airline industry, right? And these are this is the ISACs are information security. It's I can't remember the
Sure.
I can't remember the jargon there, but it's a group of people in the same category, right? So retail and hospitality has its own security conference called the RHISAC, where just the practitioners get to talk, right? And they get to share with each other and figure out problems. And that's great. The problem is, airlines are very similar to retail and hospitality. They're not sharing across that boundary, right? So somebody is getting a bot attack for, buying Nike Dunks, the same infrastructure, the same things that are going to hit that Nike Dunk purchase workflow in a retail setting is going to be the same infrastructure, the same methodologies that hit the airlines when they try to do a seat spinning attack and take over all their inventory. And so these are the kinds of sharing that I think need to occur more. But OWASP and organizations like that are trying to foster that and get more discussion around it. And I just think it's not happening enough. Like I did a birds of a feather session at RSA last year. And the idea was, bring together anybody that wants to talk about anything. We're not going to record it. No one's going to take notes, right? We just need to be able to share. And I only had 2 people come to that thing. They're both from banks, and we did have a good conversation. But I'm sure there's somebody from the manufacturing sector that would have learned something there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, echoing that sentiment, I was at a recent industry event. This was manufacturing focused. It was a great presentation that was given about security, but it was during a lunch session. And we had people more interested in the cold turkey and bad mashed potatoes than we were listening to this individual talk about these threats that are so real and so prominent right now. When it comes to the industrial sector and your experience in working with them specifically, do we think we're special? Do we think we're too different that we can't learn from some of these other marketplaces?
Oh, you're definitely special. So I've got a neighbor up the road here that has a company that builds assembly lines, right? And he works for some big automotive manufacturers and stuff. I went over to his place and I sat down and I said, I really want to understand all this. Is there some kind of security implication that goes along with all these things? And he showed me how all these systems work and stuff. And I was like, wow, there's, basic usernames and passwords. Oh, yeah, but we always set them to the same thing. That way the next technician will be able to log in and get it to work. Right. Okay. All right. Well, I can understand convenience. Oh, all right. Maybe it's like having one of those locks with the right. Everybody knows the combination. We can all get in. No one will be able to guess because the three things are worn off. Right. But what happens when we decide to take that piece of equipment and stick it on the internet because we want to start to, I don't know, figure out how many times it flips over or how many things are given to us poorly or whatever that is, right? There's some kind of operational technology that's going to feed a data stream somewhere. And that stuff that's going on now and more of it's getting bolted together, that's the stuff that I worry about for the future. Being able to do things like, I was just working with a beverage vendor a little while ago that was saying, they monitor their plants for how many ingredients they have ready to go. And they have an automated system that orders more. And he was worried that somebody was going to order so much that they wouldn't have a place to put it. And then what do you do? Right. Reject the load, send it back. Like it's going to cause too many problems downstream. And that's just a third party, sort of monitoring type of thing. What if somebody was in there maliciously really screwing with it? I heard a story years ago from a chocolate manufacturer here in the US that was really worried about someone ordering too much chocolate to a hot part of the United States, right? Ruining an entire trailer load of chocolate would be a bad idea.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And the industrial sector seems more and more vulnerable to different types of attacks as the hackers realize there's a ton of intellectual property here. There's a ton of money at stake. Supply chains are very closely intermingled. Are you seeing any different types of attacks or strategies that are being employed that are taking advantage of all these vulnerabilities that we're just not getting to in time?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the cavalcade of attacks that are just knocking the manufacturing sector offline, but I am seeing if you get noticed for whatever reason it doesn't matter, right? You make the wrong post about the wrong thing on Twitter, and before you know it, the army shows up, right?
Right.
In those situations, not only are they getting owned, these companies are just getting burned right down. They're either ransomwaring the entire operation, they're taking over their cloud environments and deleting everything. They're doing things that are going to be very difficult to recover from. And having just minor flaws in your systems, right? Just pumping some data off of a system to AWS just so you can monitor how many times a thing happens sounds great. But what happens when I get control of all of those AWS accounts? And that's what happens, right? These guys get in there and they do stuff like that.
Well, I think the big three when it comes, this is probably any industry, but especially in the industrial sector, a lot more phishing attacks, malware coming from, like you said, hey, we trust these vendors, they're coming in, but somehow the USB gets corrupted, and ransomware is a huge one in the industrial sector. We've had some high priority ones that sort of grabbed headlines, but there's a lot of other stuff going on that nobody wants to talk about. When you look at these big three, so to speak, what's been your experience in sort of either dealing with them after the fact, trying to head them off beforehand?
Yeah, I break ransomware down into the very simple. Your emails need to be better, and you need to teach your people not to click links. But that means you don't send them links ever, right? You can't tell someone never click a link and then send them their benefits enrollment link. because they're going to then get an email that says something's wrong with your benefits enrollment. They're going to click it, and that's it. Your ransomware, right? Like that's the end of it. I think that these external systems, right? So in all of the categories that you have, think about how you interact with external systems. Those are the places that protection needs to be put. For instance, when I receive an email from outside of my company, there's a huge banner at the top that says external email, right? And a lot of times that email says it's my CEO and he needs me to step out and buy some gift cards real quick, right? And the way I know it's fake is the big external email. Why is my CEO sending me an email from somewhere outside the company, right? It's very simple to trigger people on this stuff, but we don't seem to be doing it. Those are the places that we need to put systems in place to make sure that our employees can operate in any way that they'd like and it be secure, right? Sit down with them and explain, clicking links is going to be bad. That's great. And we should do that. But making it so that they never get the links is better, right?
Right.
And being able to report it and all that kind of stuff is getting more and more important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you bring up some of those very, very, again, the low-hanging fruit, the more simple approaches. We've got a lot of companies that are trying to do stuff like the double-factor authentication, zero trust policies, all of that. But really what you're saying, it even goes before implementing any of that stuff. It needs to be more basic stuff in place.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be when you do your reviews, right? If you're a CISO or head of security or whatever, and you just walked into an organization, what's the first thing you do? It's not try to implement some massive, really difficult policy. You put your head on a swivel, you look around, and you see what you got. If people are your biggest problem, then you need to focus on securing the people. If those breaches that occur because of those people are going to cause your whole facility to go offline, yes, your people are the place that you need to be. If you can just take your facility offline and get rid of it, right, so that no one can touch everything, why not do that? Well, that's the same idea here, right? You got to keep wrapping perimeters around all this stuff in order to protect yourself.
Makes sense. I got to ask you this, though, Jason. I ask pretty much everybody who comes on. Ransomware happens, right? What's your take? Do you pay or do you hold out?
I just answered this question on LinkedIn the other day. This is a great, what do you do? Do you pay or do you not pay? So I haven't had to make this decision in my life, but I've watched a lot of people try to make this decision and I've seen it fail, right? I've seen them pay the ransomware and never hear from them again.
Yeah.
I've seen them pay the ransomware and the decryption routine doesn't work because they just gave them a fake one. I've seen them pay and get their things back, right? But the number of times I've seen them pay and get their things back is far less than the number of times I've seen the problems that go along with it.
Yeah.
So if you're concerned about ransomware, do this exercise. Take your machine, close it, and rebuild everything it is that you're doing, right? Because you now have a computer that doesn't work, right? Can you do that? And if you can't, why? Start to put those pieces together that are going to avoid this idea. If you have to run around with an iPad to figure out how to get away from ransomware, do that, right? The next thing is make sure your servers are patched. If you're in an environment where you're worried about workstations getting ransomware, give them all iPads. Go secure the servers, right? Reduce your footprint and protect it as much as you can. I don't think you should pay, right? I really honestly don't. I think it feeds a system of extortion that's just going to keep existing. But I also don't think you're going to get your data back if you pay. And that's the real crux of this, right? Is you have to figure out a way around it.
Interesting. Yeah, great perspective. And the one thing I want to reinforce here, too, to everybody watching and listening to this, Jason's perspective comes from a hacker. I mean, he's a good guy. He's wearing the white hat, but his job is taking that hacker's perspective on what they would do and how they would operate. So
yeah, and that's what I do every day, right? I look at a problem that somebody might have and say, how can I make this worse so they can make it better?
Put that on the business card, right? I make stuff. I figure out how to make it worse. There you go. All right. Hey, Jason, we've talked a lot about the bad guys. Let's talk about some of the good guys. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Cequence is about.
Sure. Cequence Security, we started out as an organization that was trying to limit the amount of traffic that would go into some place, right? Whatever that place was. We've got a pretty good foothold with bots. And so we have quite a few retail customers that, when they drop shoes, shirts, whatever is everybody wants to buy, we stop the hype sale bots from attacking them and creating the environment that they can sell these things and create delight amongst their customers. From there, we move forward and said, well, we see all these other problems, and we've had companies approach us and say things like, well, we didn't know we had that API endpoint, so we built a tool that allows you to find your API endpoints. We have detection and mitigation routines that can run inline, offline, all that kind of stuff, as well as testing services. We have a full suite of humans we can throw at a problem through our managed services. And our partner channels throughout the world allow for us to, really spread this out as far as we'd like. What's nice about our solution, if you look at our core solution, you stick it in Nginx, it runs a pipeline off to us, and we can do analysis, offline analysis or inline analysis, doesn't matter. But we can do analysis on each transaction and say, is this a human? Is this, valid? Is this supposed to be like this? Sure. Because we look at transactions, we can do things like you can upload a API spec sheet to us that says, if you touch this endpoint, it must be an authenticated session. And then we can watch every transaction after that and say, oh, here's one that wasn't authenticated, how to get through, and build mitigations around that. So we really live deeply inside of API security. We have a platform that's called a unified API protection platform. And it allows for us to sit kind of anywhere where you have data moving around your environment.
Excellent. So looking forward, Jason, and again, great perspective that you have as a hacker. Looking forward to the next maybe 12 to 18 months, what are some of the trends that you're seeing right now, whether they be good or bad, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you to rewind back to 2013 when web attacks were happening all the time, right? That's like Target timeframe, Equifax, right? Like run through all of that in your mind. That was all happening on a website. Now we have APIs, so we've got a new layer and all the same problems. So we're living in 2013 right now. And as 2013 advanced forward, you started to see web attacks get more sophisticated, and that's where we're headed. API attacks are going to get more sophisticated this year. There's going to be more and more of them because they're so successful. If you look at the data that comes out of an API attack, completely unencrypted, databases that get dumped out because the system's supposed to decrypt them as it sends it, it's working the way it's supposed to, right? Decrypt, send it out. And so you start to see these attacks cause more problems. We're not seeing as many what I would call shenanigan attacks anymore, right? The guy that hacked Brewdog, he was trying to get free beer, right? But when you look at, the attacks that are coming down the line now, I'm getting entire databases, right? I've got 50 gigs of database data that I pulled out. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to see more of.
Everything going on in Ukraine, when that first started out from a cyber perspective, it was loud. There was a lot going on over there. Are you guys seeing anything more on the industrial front, whether it's utilities or otherwise, that people are going after, that the cyber element of this conflict has escalated or is doing something different?
Yeah, and it has. So from the organizations and people that I know that work on this kind of stuff, you see a lot more sort of nation state style things, right? Where they're attacking kind of industrial complex type stuff, right? Yep. Not Coca-Cola. They're going after big things. And so we're seeing more and more of that. But one of the little cool things that happened with this, the Russians being involved in the Ukraine or attacking them, declaring war. I don't know what they did, but they're blowing people up in the Ukraine and they shouldn't be. What we're seeing from this, though, is all of those Russian nation state actors that used to be there, they don't really have anything to do. And so they're doing more and more like shopping bots. They're really? Just kind of not busy, right? And it's because there's only a few units that work on nation state attacks from both Ukraine and the Soviet Union. Ukraine's busy doing stuff with Russia. So Russia's doing things. But what we're seeing is a few more Asians getting involved. There's always been a few people from Thailand, a few people from China, that are, sort of getting involved in attacking organizations. What we're seeing now is a bigger step from China, though I will say they're easy to see. When the Chinese attack you, they're very loud. It comes all at once, and it's a mess.
So it's kind of so the folks from Asia are basically picking up the slack because everybody in Russia and Ukraine is preoccupied with each other. Well, that's interesting, boy. Well, definitely something to keep you busy. Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Anything else you'd like to add before we part?
The one thing that I try to pitch every time I get on one of these shows is if you have developers, if you have anybody writing code and they're not involved in OWASP, encourage them to get involved in OWASP. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a huge organization of people like me that worry about application security. If you get involved, I promise it won't be terribly boring.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. For more information on the work Cequence does, you can go to www.cequence.ai. Cequence is spelled Cequence. Thanks for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Jason Kent, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.